Why would someone risk everything, their job, their future in America, their very existence, to kiss a billionaire in front of New York's elite? Was it love, or was it something far more desperate? This is the true story of the Christmas kiss that divided society, and what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you thought you knew about sacrifice, courage, and the kind of love that asks for nothing in return. At 34 years old, he built a tech empire worth over $2 billion, founded 3 successful companies, and graced the cover of Forbes twice. To the world, he had everything: wealth, power, influence, respect. But behind the perfectly tailored suits and the carefully curated Instagram feed showing him at charity galas and tech conferences, Marcus was drowning. His father had passed away 18 months earlier from cancer, and Marcus hadn't stopped working long enough to grieve. He filled his calendar with meetings and events, surrounded himself with people who wanted something from him, and came home every night to a mansion that echoed with emptiness. And this is Claire Bennett, 29 years old, a housekeeper at the Chen estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. She'd arrived in America 3 years earlier from a small town in Ohio after her father died, leaving her mother with medical bills they couldn't pay and a diagnosis that required treatment they couldn't afford. Claire took the housekeeping job because it paid well and came with room and board, which meant she could send most of her paycheck home to her mother every month. She was invisible to most of the wealthy families she worked for, just another pair of hands that kept their homes running smoothly. But Marcus Chen was about to see her in a way no one else ever had, and that moment of recognition would change both of their lives forever. Before we go deeper into their story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Claire's first 3 weeks at the Chen estate were unremarkable. She arrived at 6 in the morning, worked until 4 in the afternoon, and rarely saw Marcus, who left for his office before she arrived and came home long after her shift ended. The head housekeeper, a stern woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, had made the rules clear: stay invisible, don't speak unless spoken to, and never, under any circumstances, bother Mr. Chen with personal matters. Claire followed those rules perfectly until the day she found the photograph. It was mid-November, and she was dusting the bookshelves in Marcus's private study when a frame fell from behind a row of books. The glass didn't break, but when Claire picked it up, she found herself staring at a photo of a young Marcus, maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing next to an older man who was clearly his father. They were at what looked like a science fair, and Marcus was holding a blue ribbon, grinning with the unself-conscious joy that children have before life teaches them to guard their happiness. The older man had his hand on Marcus's shoulder, looking at his son with such obvious pride and love that it made Claire's chest ache. Her own father used to look at her that way, back when she was young and he was healthy, before the medical bills started piling up and the treatment stopped working. She was so lost in the memory that she didn't hear Marcus enter the study. That was the last time I won anything that actually mattered to him. Claire jumped, nearly dropping the frame. Marcus stood in the doorway, still in his suit from work, his tie loosened and his expression unreadable. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Chen," Claire said quickly, her face flushing. "It fell when I was dusting, and I was just putting it back. I wasn't trying to pry or anything, I swear." "It's fine," Marcus said, crossing the room to stand beside her. He took the frame from her hands and stared at it for a long moment. "He died last year. Cancer. He fought it for 3 years, and I was too busy building my second company to spend time with him. By the time I realized how little time we had left, it was too late." The rawness in his voice caught Claire off guard. This wasn't how billionaires were supposed to sound. They were supposed to be confident and controlled, not vulnerable and grieving. "My dad died 2 years ago," Claire heard herself say. "Also cancer. I was working 2 jobs trying to help with the medical bills, and I kept telling myself I'd spend more time with him once things calmed down. But things never calmed down, and then he was gone. I didn't even get to say goodbye properly." Marcus looked at her then, really looked at her, and Claire saw recognition in his eyes. Not recognition of her as the housekeeper, but recognition of a shared experience, a shared pain. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Thank you. I'm sorry about your dad too." They stood there in the study, 2 people who'd lost their fathers too soon, surrounded by books and memories and the kind of silence that feels less empty when it's shared. Then Marcus cleared his throat and said, "You don't have to call me Mr. Chen when it's just us." "Marcus is fine. Mrs. Rodriguez would have my head if she heard me call you by your first name," Claire replied with a small smile. "Then we won't tell her," Marcus said, returning the smile. And just like that, something shifted between them. Over the next month, Marcus and Claire developed a quiet friendship that existed in the margins of their very different lives. It started small, Marcus coming home earlier and finding Claire finishing up her work, exchanging a few sentences about their days, asking questions that showed they were actually listening to each other's answers. Claire learned that Marcus hated the tech industry's obsession with disruption and innovation for its own sake, that he'd rather be building things that actually help people than chasing the next big thing. She learned that he played piano when he was stressed, that he read poetry late at night when he couldn't sleep, that his favorite food was his father's homemade dumplings, a recipe Marcus had never learned because he'd always assumed there would be time later. And Marcus learned about Claire too. How she'd been a straight-A student in high school but couldn't afford college, how she loved old movies from the 40s and 50s, how she called her mother every Sunday and lied about how happy she was because she didn't want her mom to worry, how she was saving every penny to bring her mother to the United States for treatment because the small-town doctors in Ohio had done all they could, how she felt invisible most of the time, like she was just moving through other people's lives without ever really living her own. One evening in early December, Claire was arranging fresh flowers in the living room when she heard piano music coming from the music room down the hall. She recognized the piece, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of her father's favorites. He used to play a recording of it on Sunday mornings while making breakfast, and the melody always made Claire think of him. Without thinking, she followed the sound to the music room and stood in the doorway, watching Marcus's hands move across the keys with a grace that seemed at odds with his usual controlled demeanor. When the piece ended, he turned and saw her standing there. "Sorry," Claire said. "I heard the music and my dad loved that piece. I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not interrupting," Marcus replied. "Do you play?" "A little. My dad taught me some basics before he got too sick to sit at the piano." "Want to try?" Marcus gestured to the bench beside him. Claire hesitated, then crossed the room and sat down. Her fingers found the keys tentatively, playing a simple melody her father had taught her years ago. It was rough and unpracticed, but Marcus didn't seem to mind. When she finished, he said, "Your dad taught you well." "He was patient. I wasn't a very good student. I kept getting distracted and wanting to play my own made-up songs instead of learning the real ones." "The best musicians always break the rules," Marcus said. "My dad used to say that too." They sat there at the piano, shoulders almost touching, and Claire felt something she hadn't felt in years. The sense that someone actually saw her, not as help or as an employee, but as a person worth knowing. It was dangerous, she knew. There were rules about this sort of thing, invisible lines that people like her weren't supposed to cross. But in that moment, with Chopin lingering in the air and Marcus looking at her like she mattered, Claire couldn't bring herself to care about the rules. The illusion of their private world shattered 1 week before Christmas when Marcus's ex-fiancée, Victoria Sterling, arrived at the estate unannounced. Claire was polishing silverware in the dining room when she heard the commotion in the foyer. Victoria's voice, bright and commanding, announcing her arrival like she still belonged there. Mrs. Rodriguez rushed past, whispering urgently to the other staff members to make sure everything was perfect, that Miss Sterling's favorite flowers were in her usual guest room, that her dietary restrictions were noted in the kitchen. Claire had heard about Victoria from the other staff members. She was 32, came from old money, had been engaged to Marcus for 8 months before calling it off 2 years ago because, according to the rumors, she'd found someone wealthier. Now, apparently, she was back. Claire tried to make herself invisible as Victoria swept through the house with Marcus trailing behind her, looking resigned and tired. Victoria was beautiful in that effortless way that only generational wealth could buy, designer clothes that looked casual but probably cost more than Claire made in a month, a confidence that came from never having to question whether she belonged somewhere. "Darling, the Christmas Eve gala is going to be spectacular this year," Victoria was saying as they passed the dining room. "I've already confirmed with the caterers, and the guest list is up to 450. Everyone who matters will be there." Her eyes swept over Claire without really seeing her, the way people look at furniture. "You really should update your staff uniforms, Marcus. This is supposed to be a modern household." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. That evening, Claire was taking out the recycling when she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. The kitchen window was open, and voices drifted out from inside, Victoria and her brother, Dominic, talking in low, conspiratorial tones. "Are you sure this will work?" That was Victoria's voice, slightly muffled. "Trust me, sis. One dissolved tablet in his champagne, and he'll be agreeable to anything." It's not dangerous. Just makes people more susceptible to suggestion. You propose during your toast, he says yes in front of everyone, and by the time it wears off, he'll be too embarrassed to back out. Dominic's voice was casual, like they were discussing catering choices instead of drugging someone. What if he notices something's wrong? He won't. The stuff is tasteless, colorless, and works within 15 minutes. Just make sure you're the one who hands him his glass at midnight. I'll handle getting it into his drink. Claire stood frozen by the recycling bins, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. They were planning to drug Marcus, to manipulate him into proposing in front of hundreds of people. And if Claire reported it, if she said anything, who would believe the housekeeper over Victoria Sterling and her family? She'd lose her job, probably get blacklisted from ever working in Greenwich again, might even face legal trouble if they accused her of making false claims. But if she said nothing, Marcus would be trapped in an engagement he didn't want, manipulated by people who saw him as a prize to be won rather than a person to be loved. The next few days were torture for Claire. She tried to find moments alone with Marcus to warn him, but Victoria was always there, attached to his side like a beautiful, venomous leech. And on the rare occasions when Claire did catch Marcus's eye, Victoria seemed to sense it, redirecting his attention with practiced ease. 3 days before Christmas, Victoria cornered Claire in the laundry room. "I know what you're doing," Victoria said, her voice sweet but her eyes cold. "You think I don't notice the way you look at him? The way you linger when you're cleaning his study?" "I don't know what you mean, Miss Sterling," Claire said carefully, focusing on folding the sheets she'd just pulled from the dryer. "Don't play dumb. I've seen girls like you before. You work in a rich man's house, you see the lifestyle, and you start getting ideas. Start thinking maybe you could be more than the help." Victoria stepped closer, and Claire could smell her expensive perfume, something floral and cloying. "Let me be very clear about something. Marcus and I are getting back together. We're announcing our engagement at the Christmas Eve gala. And if you do anything to interfere with that, if you so much as look at him inappropriately, I will destroy you. I have friends at Immigration and Customs Enforcement. One phone call, and I can make your life very difficult. I can make your mother's situation even worse. Do you understand me?" Claire's hands stilled on the sheets. "You're threatening me. I'm educating you about reality. Stay in your lane, and everything will be fine. Cross it, and you'll regret it." Victoria smiled, bright and empty, then left the laundry room. Claire stood there, shaking with anger and fear. Marcus stood near the Christmas tree with Victoria, who looked stunning in a red dress that matched her lipstick. They were surrounded by well-wishers, people offering congratulations on their reconciliation, even though Marcus's smile looked strained and his eyes were distant. Victoria kept touching his arm, his shoulder, his back, marking her territory in small possessive gestures that made Claire's stomach turn. Around 9 o'clock, Claire was refilling her tray in the kitchen when she overheard Victoria and Dominic talking in the hallway just outside. "Do you have it?" Victoria's voice was low and urgent. "Right here." Claire risked a glance through the kitchen door and saw Dominic pull a small glass vial from his pocket. It contained a few pills, small and white. "I'll dissolve one in his champagne just before midnight. Make sure you're the one who hands it to him. And you're sure this will work?" "Positive. Within 20 minutes, he'll be agreeable to anything. Just make sure the photographer is ready to capture the proposal. Once it's on Instagram, there's no backing out." They moved away, and Claire stood in the kitchen, her heart pounding. This was it. This was the moment she'd been dreading. In a few hours, they were going to drug Marcus, manipulate him into proposing in front of 500 people, and there was nothing Claire could do about it without risking everything. Except that wasn't quite true. There was one thing she could do. It would cost her everything, her job, her future in America, any chance of helping her mother. But it might save Marcus from making a mistake he'd regret for the rest of his life. Claire thought about her father, about the stories he used to tell her about doing the right thing even when it was hard, about how character was defined not by what you did when people were watching, but by what you did when no one would ever know the sacrifice you'd made. She thought about Marcus sitting at the piano, playing Chopin with such beautiful sadness, about the way he'd looked at his father's photograph, full of regret for time he could never get back, about how he'd said she made him feel like himself again. And she thought about what it would mean to stand by and watch him be trapped by people who didn't love him, who saw him as a prize instead of a person. The decision crystallized in her mind with perfect, terrifying clarity. She was going to save him, even if it destroyed her. At 11:45, the guests gathered in the main hall for the midnight toast. Marcus stood at the front of the room with Victoria beside him, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Dominic was near the champagne table, and Claire watched from her position near the back wall as he casually dropped something into one of the crystal flutes. Victoria caught her brother's eye, nodded slightly, then picked up 2 glasses and moved toward Marcus. This was it. The moment. Claire's last chance to do nothing, to stay invisible, to protect herself and her future. But instead, she found herself moving through the crowd, pushing past women in expensive gowns and men in perfectly tailored tuxedos. She didn't have a plan, didn't know what she was going to do until she was doing it. "Marcus!" Claire called out, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. Every head in the room turned to look at her. She saw shock, confusion, disdain on the faces of the wealthy guests who'd barely registered her presence all evening. Victoria's eyes widened with fury. Marcus looked startled, then concerned. Claire reached him just as Victoria was handing him the champagne glass. Without thinking, without letting herself consider the consequences, Claire took the glass from Victoria's hand and set it on a nearby table. Then she stood on her toes, put her hands on Marcus's shoulders, and kissed him. The room erupted. People gasped, cameras flashed. Someone dropped a glass that shattered against the marble floor. Claire could hear Victoria's outraged voice and Dominic's angry protests, but she focused on the kiss, on making it real enough that Marcus would understand this wasn't a mistake or a moment of insanity. When she pulled back, Marcus was staring at her with wide eyes. Claire leaned in close and whispered in his ear, "The champagne Victoria was giving you is drugged. Her brother put something in it. They were going to make you propose." Marcus's expression shifted from shock to understanding to fury. He looked at the champagne glass Claire had set down, then at Victoria, whose face had gone pale. "Is this true?" Marcus asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Of course not," Victoria said quickly. "She's obviously delusional." "Marcus, darling, you can't possibly believe." "Test it," Marcus said, gesturing to the glass. "Right now. Get security to test that champagne." The head of security, a former police officer named James, stepped forward and carefully picked up the glass. The room had gone completely silent, 500 people watching the drama unfold. James took the glass to a side table, pulled out what looked like a drug testing kit, and ran the test. His face grew grim as he looked at the results. "Sir, there's something in this. Looks like a benzodiazepine, probably mixed with something else. This isn't wine." The room exploded again, but this time the shocked whispers were directed at Victoria and Dominic. Marcus turned to them, his face hard. "Get out," he said quietly. "Both of you. Get out of my house right now, and if you ever come near me or anyone in my life again, I will press charges. Do you understand me?" Victoria tried to protest, but Dominic grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. The guests parted to let them through, some filming on their phones, others whispering behind their hands. Claire stood frozen, watching them go, and then reality crashed down on her. She'd just kissed her employer in front of 500 people. She'd caused a scene at one of the biggest social events of the season. She'd crossed every line that wasn't supposed to be crossed. Mrs. Rodriguez was going to fire her. She'd probably be blacklisted from every estate in Greenwich. And Victoria would make good on her threats, would use her connections to make Claire's life a nightmare. But as Claire turned to leave, to slip out of the room before anyone could stop her, Marcus caught her hand. "Wait," he said. "Don't go." "I should," Claire said, her voice shaking. "I've caused enough trouble. You saved me." Marcus's grip on her hand tightened. "You risked everything to save me from making a horrible mistake. Why would you do that?" Claire looked up at him, and all the fear and uncertainty of the past few weeks came pouring out. "Because you deserve to know the truth. Because I couldn't stand by and watch them manipulate you. Because you're kind and generous and you actually see people, and the world needs more of that, not less." Tears were streaming down her face now, and she didn't care who was watching. "And because somewhere along the way, I started to care about you. Not because you're wealthy or successful, but because you're you. And I know that's completely inappropriate and crosses every boundary, but it's the truth." Marcus pulled her closer, his other hand coming up to cup her face. "Can I tell you a secret?" he said softly. "Somewhere along the way, I started to care about you too. You made me remember what it's like to be human instead of just successful. You made me laugh. You made me feel less alone." He glanced at the crowd of guests still watching them, then looked back at Claire. "I know this is complicated. I know there are 500 people staring at us right now, and this is probably going to be all over social media by morning. But I don't care. For the first time in months, maybe years, I don't care what people think. Will you stay? Not just tonight. Stay. We'll figure out the details, deal with whatever comes next, but please don't leave." Claire thought about her mother, about the medical bills and the uncertain future. She thought about the job she'd probably lost and the scandal she'd just created. And then she thought about Marcus's hand in hers, about the way he was looking at her like she was the only person in the room. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him all evening, and then he kissed her again. This time, it wasn't desperate or rushed. It was tender and real and full of promise. And somewhere in the crowd, someone started clapping. Then another person joined in, and another, until the entire room was applauding. Maybe some of them were clapping because they loved drama. Maybe some were just relieved that the evening had ended with romance instead of scandal. But Claire didn't care. For the first time in years, she felt seen, valued, chosen. Not despite who she was, but because of it. The next morning, Claire woke up in the guest room Marcus had insisted she stay in. For a moment, she wondered if the previous night had been a dream. Then she checked her phone and saw dozens of messages from friends and former coworkers, all containing links to social media posts and news articles. The kiss had indeed gone viral. There were think pieces about class and romance, posts debating whether Claire had been brave or inappropriate, speculation about Marcus's love life. But there were also thousands of comments from people saying the story had made them cry, that it reminded them to be brave, that love across social boundaries was beautiful and should be celebrated. Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on the door around 8 o'clock. Claire braced herself for the firing she knew was coming. "Instead," Mrs. Rodriguez said, "Mr. Chen would like to see you in his study when you're ready. And Miss Bennett, for what it's worth, I think you're very brave. Not many people would have done what you did." Claire found Marcus in his study, looking tired but peaceful in a way she'd never seen before. "Hi," she said from the doorway. "Hi. Come in. Please." Claire sat in the chair across from his desk, and Marcus leaned back in his own chair, studying her. "I spent most of last night thinking about what happens next," he said. "And I want to be very clear about something. I'm not offering you this because I feel guilty or obligated. I'm offering it because I mean it. I had my lawyer draw up papers this morning." He slid a folder across the desk to her. Claire opened it carefully and found herself looking at legal documents. A job offer as his personal assistant, with a salary that made her gasp. A medical insurance plan that would cover her mother's treatment. A housing stipend. "Marcus, I can't accept this," Claire said, even as her hands trembled holding the papers. "This is too much. People will think—" "I don't care what people think," Marcus interrupted gently. "But if you're worried about appearances, here's what I propose. You take the job. We keep things professional for a while. Give the media time to move on to the next story. Your mother gets the treatment she needs, and you get to be close enough to visit her regularly. And when enough time has passed that no one can say I hired you just because I'm attracted to you, we can explore what this is between us." He leaned forward. "But Claire, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this to buy you or manipulate you. I'm doing this because you deserve opportunities, because you're intelligent and capable and you've been wasting your talents cleaning houses for people who don't appreciate you. You saved me last night. Let me help you save your mother. And then we can figure out the rest together." Claire looked at the papers, at the job offer that would change everything, at the medical plan that could give her mother a real chance. She thought about pride and independence, about not wanting to be the woman who was rescued by a rich man. But she also thought about her mother's face when they talked on the phone, about how tired she always sounded, about how Claire had spent years sacrificing everything to try to help her, and here was a chance to actually do it. "On one condition," Claire said finally. "I want to earn this. I'll take the job, but I want real responsibilities. I want to work hard and prove that I deserve the position." I don't want anyone to be able to say I'm just here because of what happened last night. Deal, Marcus said immediately. And Claire, you should know that I already had my team research your mother's condition. There's a specialist at Johns Hopkins who's had good results with her type of illness. I'd like to fly her out next week for an evaluation, if that's okay with you. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Why are you doing all this? Because my father spent his last months regretting that he didn't prioritize the people he loved over the business he built. And I'm not going to make the same mistake. You matter to me, Claire. Your happiness matters. And if I have resources that can make a difference, why wouldn't I use them? Thank you, Claire whispered. Thank you for everything. Thank the universe for putting you in that kitchen when Victoria and her brother were planning their scheme, Marcus said with a slight smile. And thank yourself for having the courage to act on what you knew was right. Now I need to hear from you. How do you feel Victoria should have handled the situation at the gala? Should she have held Mr. Chen's hand more? Drop your theories in the comments. I read every single one, and we might even feature the best guess in our next video.